It is a beautiful morning here at Proton's Center of Excellence, where we have been invited to preview the new Proton X90. Unfortunately, it's not launched yet, so we still don't have prices. However, Proton is very excited to let us see and experience just how the X90 is like out in the real world. So today we're going to take this from here at COE up to Genting Highlands. Now, before we do that, be sure to hit subscribe and hit the bell to be notified every time we make a new upload. But ladies and gentlemen, this is the media preview drive of the new Proton X90. Now, before we go on the drive, let's first talk about the way the X90 looks, because we did have a closed-door preview. However, we were not allowed to film at all. So this is the first time we'll be able to get this car on film. Now, up front, you get the latest iteration of Proton's new corporate grille, where you still find the ethereal bow underneath, but it now frames the infinite weave grille, which is patterned with these little diamond pins. Apparently, this is supposed to be inspired by Songkit design. I'll leave that to you. Now, either side sits a couple of full LED headlights, which on certain models includes a scrolling function for the front indicators, which I think is quite nice, underneath which sit full LED fog lights. Now, one of the few things that you will notice immediately about the X90 is that it is actually not very tall a car. This is largely down to the fact that this model is built off of a new platform compared to the Proton X70. And as a result, the chassis of the car has reduced, or rather been lowered quite significantly. And as a result, it means that you have a slightly more car-like proportion to the X90. And on the side, you will find 19-inch alloy wheels wrapped in Continental Eco Contact 6 tires. Now, these tires were chosen both for the lack of roading resistance as well as relatively low NVH, which we will touch on shortly in the driving portion. Now, down the side, you will see the X90's most obvious trait, which is its sheer size. Now, the X90 is obviously larger than the X50 and X70, as you could probably tell by the name, but Proton has been very smart in ways to emphasize the size of this car. So, for example, you have these indenters here along the fenders in order to highlight the size of the wheel arches and, of course, highlight the 19-inch alloy wheels that sit beneath. And, of course, because this is a mild hybrid, you also get a 48-volt EMS badge down here, just underneath the wing mirrors, which are mounted on the doors rather than up here on the windows. This is to not only improve visibility, but also to improve aerodynamics, again, in a bid to lower NVH. And at the back, you will find full LED tail lights, as well as a large, very bold Proton script across. Now, the eagle-eyed amongst you may notice that the Proton script seems to look a little bit different this time around, and the reason for that is because Proton has actually beveled the edges of the badge this time around in order to make it look more jewel-like than before. Small things, but you know. You have the full LED tail lights, like I mentioned earlier, with LED indicators here. However, there is no scrolling function, and you will find the reverse lights live down here. Bit strange. The other thing that I find a bit strange is the placement of the number plate, because it's down here on the bumper. I feel like if it was sat up here, it would have looked a little bit nicer, because there is a lot of metal here that seems to be unused. Now, behind this tailgate, with the third row up, you will find a pretty decent amount of space. Behind the third row, you will see enough room for maybe a couple of cargo bags, but folding the third row is relatively easy because they fold very flat, and then you have a pretty good amount of room. I will decry two things, however. Firstly, the load lip on this car is very, very high because this has to make room for a spare tire which lives down there. And secondly, it is the fact that there is no tonneau cover in this. Usually for three-row SUVs, you will find a tonneau cover that fits behind the second row, but unfortunately there isn't one available for the X90, which means any cargo you have back here will be relatively exposed. Now, the big thing about the X90 is the fact that Proton is going upmarket. They are going premium, and as a result, the interior has improved significantly. So, you will find that upmarket interior in here. In fact, no matter how you cut it, the Proton X90 is very clearly a step above other Proton products. This is very evident by the choice of materials, because even in this premium model, you get leatherette seats, you get stitching up here on the dash and on the doors. You also get soft touch materials up here on the dash as well, and it looks really nice. You also get a new gear selector for the X90, which is different from the trigger style selector that we've seen from the X70 and X50. And the operation is a little bit odd because there is no sort of unlock button. And to move it from sort of neutral into drive, you actually have to tap it twice. If you're going from park to drive, you've got to tap it twice. If you're going from drive to reverse, you have to push it twice. This is very similar to what we've seen in Volvos, which I'm not the biggest fan of because it makes 3-point turns take a lot more time. Now, this is a touchscreen. And I'm saying that to emphasize it because you would be remiss to think that this controller here is for the touchscreen. It isn't. This controller is instead for the drive modes where you can choose between Eco, Comfort and Sport. You also have your hill descent control, your traction control button and the trigger for your 360-degree camera all down here. On the right side, you've got your electronic parking brake. On the left, you have your buttons for parking, such as the parking sensors, as well as the automatic park assist, which the premium and flagship models get. Otherwise, in here you get, like I said, the big touchscreen up front as well as a full digital instrument cluster up ahead of you. Now, these are two brand new units from Proton. The user interface is completely different from what we've seen in other Proton models. This is an updated version, and so the graphics in this are much better than before, and more importantly, the language in these are much better than before. No more silly typos, no more silly grammatical errors. All of this is nice and clean and professional, which is exactly what you'd expect from a vehicle that costs about this much. And before you ask, I still don't know what the prices are. And up ahead of you sits a brand new steering wheel with all of the usual multifunction functions, just in a slightly different design, again to emphasize the upmarketness of this car. But the second row is where the X90 makes a clear departure over the X70. And the reason for that is because you have a few more amenities back here and you have absolutely acres of space. Now, I represent the national average, and yet I still have acres of headroom and acres of legroom. With this seat set up in my driving position and these seats set up to provide a decent amount of space for the third row, which we'll explore in a moment, as you can see, I have a good amount of under-thigh support and I can still tuck my feet in underneath the seat in front of me should I wish to slide these all the way forward to provide even more space in the back, either for people or for cargo. Now, in this premium model, you do still get dual zone climate control, which means that the second and third row passengers will have to share the climate with the front passenger with the settings up front. I can, however, adjust my fan speed here, and the aircon blowers are up here on the roof, which means they will never be blocked by somebody sitting up here in the middle, and it goes directly to your face, which means it's nice and comfortable. Now, in flagship models where you get a 6-seater setup, you actually get a set of ventilated captain's seats as well as a Boss switch for the front passenger seat, but we'll explore that in a moment. Back here we have a USB-C port and a USB-A port, a little cubby down here, a fold-down armrest with a couple of cup holders and decently sized door bins big enough for litre-sized bottles. Aside from that, no more amenities here in the middle. But the question you're asking is, does the X90 function as a proper 7-seater? And as you can see, it's really not that bad. In terms of other 7-seater SUVs, I would go as far as to say that the X90 offers a little bit more room than vehicles like the Mazda CX-8 for that matter, and even the Kia Sorento for that matter. This is quite impressive. And the great thing about this is, again, this seat is set up the way I was earlier, and even though these seats are mounted quite low, I can actually stretch my legs out a little bit because my feet can tuck in underneath the row in front of me. One of the things I certainly appreciate is that it seems that this car has concert seating where the seat base for every row is mounted a little bit higher, and so I still get a pretty decent view out over the 2 rows in front of me. And I also get a couple of aircon vents up here on the ceiling, I get cup holders, I get USB ports on either side, and you know, life back here isn't really that bad. It is worth noting, however, that adults like me will not be happy back here for a little more than maybe an hour because, as you can see, I have no under-thigh support and these seats are, as I mentioned earlier, mounted quite low. Additionally, because I'm very far away from the driver in front of me, I think it might be quite difficult to maintain a conversation. These seats back here are maybe suitable for children or teenagers, but nothing more than that. Also, the third row seats do not come with ISOFIX mounts, which means you cannot put child seats back here, although genuinely I wouldn't know why you'd do that. And now, the most important part, does this drive like a Proton? So now, finally behind the wheel of Proton's vaunted X90. And there are a few things that we need to talk about, because for starters, Proton is claiming that this is their most upmarket model yet, which is why it also has its most advanced engine. So under the bonnet is a 1.5 litre TGDI engine and a very loud ADAS system. and it's paired to a belt starter generator, or a 48 volt mile hybrid system. Now together it produces 190 PS and 300 Newton meters of torque, which is a 13 PS increase and 45 Newton meter improvement, 55 Newton meter improvement over the non-hybrid model. I do apologize for the constant screaming of the ADAS system because I haven't yet figured out how to shut it off. Now, the reason why Proton's gone with a mild hybrid system this time around is very simple. Number one is obviously to improve fuel economy. So now with these belt-driven starter generator, it means that this vehicle has the ability to coast at very high speeds between 60 to 130 kilometers an hour, allowing for the engine and transmission to be disengaged from the wheels, which reduces drag and allows the car to coast. That's positive number one. Positive number two, obviously, is so that when you're driving in low-speed situations like this, the starter generator can provide a little bit of extra torque when you're starting off from a standstill. So basically, high-stress situations is where the small starter generator can help with performance. But at higher speeds, that's where the internal combustion engine runs its own show without the belt-driven starter helping in any way, shape, or form. Now, the logic here is that both of these components have their role to play, with the internal combustion engine doing work at higher speed when you need a little bit more torque and a little bit more power, whereas the belt-driven starter generator will help where the engine would be less efficient. So it provides a support role, as it were. Now in execution, I can tell you that it's pretty smooth. Compared to the X70 and X50, which also use the same engine, the starting sequence is a lot smoother in this. And for the first time in a Proton, we also get automatic start-stop, which, because of that belt-driven starter generator, is very smooth and very fast. I'm pretty sure you didn't notice that the car shut itself off and switched itself back on again a few seconds ago. See, that's just how smooth it is. And of course, during heavy acceleration from a standstill, that BSG will help to provide a little bit of extra torque. Now, that's how it's supposed to work in theory. In execution, however, the effects of the mild hybrid system are quite mild, as you would imagine. So there isn't this instantaneous wave of torque. Rather, you still have to wait for the engine to kind of get up to speed, which is what we've come to get quite used to with the 1.5 litre that we've seen in the X70 and the X50. The transmission also remains quite relaxed in its nature, and so it doesn't kick down as readily as you'd expect it to. And as a result, it does mean that this is meant, it's very clear from the driver's seat that the X90 is meant to be driven smoothly, not intently. And if you drive it smoothly, the X90 seems to be relatively rewarding. The NVH levels in this car are impressively low, even better than that of the X70, which is a vehicle that we continue to compliment on its very, very low NVH levels, with road noise and wind noise only creeping in at about 130 and 140 kilometers an hour. If you stick below that, everything works just fine. And of course, when you're sticking to more reasonable speeds, that's when you can enjoy the rest of this cabin. Now, again, we've only had very limited interaction with this car because, for starters, we don't have a lot of time with it, and secondly, it's because this is a pre-production model, and so there are still lots of little elements that still need to be ironed out and fixed and so on prior to this car going to full series production and to waiting customer hands. But from what we've seen here, it's very clear that the new infotainment system provided by Acotec, as well as the new graphics on this fully digital instrument cluster, are much, much better than what we've come to get used to from Proton. So Proton's claims that the X90 signals the future of the brand doesn't seem like hot air to me. It seems very clear that Proton has serious intent going forward in terms of pushing itself a little bit further up market and making itself into a premium mass market brand rather than sort of the affordable brand that it sits at today. This obviously bodes very well because the X90, like the X70 and X50, has potential for export markets, and so models like these will be far more convincing to foreign buyers than the Sagas and Personas that we're used to. So is the X90 writing checks that Proton cannot cash? I don't think so. The X90 certainly has a lot of potential, and there is certainly a lot of areas where we've seen a significant improvement versus the vehicles that we've seen introduced by Proton before. But just how far this will go, we'll have to wait and see. And whether or not the X90 will be able to achieve Proton sales targets is, again, another matter of wait and see. So what do I think about Proton's new X90? Well, It's certainly a far more premium experience than what we've seen from Proton before, which means that all of their promises that this will elevate the brand may not necessarily be hot air. That engine is certainly a very sophisticated machine, and the mild hybrid system certainly seems to deliver in terms of claimed fuel economy. The only question now is, how much is this going to be? Because the pricing of the X90 will determine whether or not it will be a runaway success in Malaysia or if it'll just be another run. The only way to find out is to wait for the launch, which Proton says will be happening very, very soon. So be sure to hit subscribe and hit the bell to be notified every time we make a new upload. Hopefully the next one will be from the launch. And be sure to follow us on all of our social media channels, Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. All the links are in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Take care and stay safe.